Yeah, I mean, yes, and I think that I'll put it this way: that we won't. I don't think we can see that until we would get through all the stages, because the next stage brings up that very problem. That sometimes the process doesn't seem all that trustworthy, and the world seems totally messed up. That's when the darkness, the sin, the absurdity has to be brought into the picture, and without it, the picture will be incomplete. There's no doubt about it. If you stop after in an approach to life with befriending creation, well, you have no way to live. You have no way to deal with the dark forces, and that's very practical. I mean, that's how do you deal with a divorce that you don't want? I mean, how do you deal with the sickness of a child that tears you up? I mean, you've got to have a framework for looking at that. That brings it in. Now, I would say the Christian creedal statement, life is trustworthy, is not a glib sort of toss-off phrase. In the Christian perspective, it is a result of looking at the cross and the life of Jesus. It's ultimately a faith statement. It said something like, despite the absurdity, despite all the untrustworthy things that go on in life, I believe at some deeper level that life is still trustworthy. It has to encompass those experiences of tragedy. And that's very important, because we can't hand on to the next generation some simplistic panacea, everything's beautiful and nice. And it'll break down. You can get people to think like that for a while, and people can be on a high for a while or something, but it won't wash. It won't make it. I was just talking to a medical student, a very bright young woman, and wrestling with this very question. The theology she had received would not now encompass the tragic dimension of life that she was experiencing. She had nothing to do. I mean, she's just, it won't go together. So if you got a totally, if you got a glib life is trustworthy, grace, beautiful, all this, I mean, you can't live with tragedy. You can't live with suffering. You probably can't be a doctor and deal with that all the time. So I mean, it's a tough statement, and it finally only reaches its fulfillment after we've looked at the dark side. It's the notion of the death and resurrection of Jesus. Both things have to be in there. And the resurrection is a statement that life is trustworthy despite the absurdity of the cross. That would be the summary for it.
Sometimes I present an article in the classroom which says that teenagers that these are not, like they're told sometimes, the best years of your life, because as soon as you get out of school you're going to have to get a job and all this stuff, and these kids are sitting home with no dates and overweight and acne and so on like that, and all of these type of problems, and yet they're being told in some cases that this is the best years of your life. And the article makes the point that things do get better, and that life does present other things and so on like that. And some kids that are having a very difficult time are being thrown that statement.
I think we have to keep in mind that if life is indeed trustworthy, as the Christian claim is, that each of the new stages of life would offer new possibilities for development, including things like menopause, including things like retirement. I mean, you have to be able to see that each new stage presents new opportunities for growth and development, rather than thinking the life is closed off to us because of whatever event. Let me look at some of these practical consequences for a minute here, what I think that this will mean to us. First, what all this suggests is we really need to cultivate an awareness of God's presence in our world, in the created world. Learn to find God in ourselves and all things. A lot of that's connected with our notion of time. I was talking to a guy last night, professor, who typical type A personality, competitive, driving, get it done. And he told me that his whole current project now is to get beyond that. A new project. Now we're going to be driven to live in the moment. We have a new compulsion, live in the now. He's describing to me the compulsive character of this. And, I mean, how hard it is to get beyond it, and how difficult it is to see another way of living besides that. This is our response to the workaholism thing. It's the response to the busyness. It's got to be a way of living out the Sabbath as on an everyday basis. So in our culture, it's hard to exactly know how we get beyond this. You know, I've made a lot of suggestions in the past to myself and others of how you do this. You know, it's almost, there's a discipline involved in it, I believe that, where one brackets the concerns about the future, brackets the concerns about success, and tries to live in a sort of a simple awareness of what's going on now. It's like I said, you know, even the kind of spiritual reading one would do. I find myself advising people a lot of times they'll get a spiritual book and they think I got to finish it in a week, or get through a chapter a night, or do something. And I'm saying, no, go back to the traditional method. Just read for a while, then when an idea catches you, stop. You'd have a good day if you only read one sentence. That'd be a good day, because then you'd spend the next 20 minutes meditating on that one sentence. You'd really be into it. That's a different thing than saying I read 4 spiritual books in the last month, or I finished a chapter today. Good. There's a whole different feel to it when we do with that traditional notion of Lectio Divina, as it was called, the Latin phrase meaning just exactly what I just said. You read it in order to be in touch with the Spirit. Maybe there's things to do like that, that helps us to live in the now. Today's probably a good opportunity for some of us to practice this. I was going to try to practice it. I was going to be laid back today and not worry about how much I have to get done. And I'm already worried about whether I'm going to get through the material. I mean, it's a great trap. You can just feel it. I can feel it. That sort of tension. And it's a question of how you get beyond that tension and are able to mine the riches of the moment. That's the first element that I think we have to work on. Now, how we do it, I mean, everyone's got to find their own ways, I think. Sometimes it's as simple as trying to concentrate, and Tom said a priest was seeking my advice the other day, and he, you know, it was a question of listening to his people. He said, sometimes I don't know if I do listen. And I was suggesting that, well, you know, that's really something that we have to work at, to try to see if we listen. One good test of that is that after somebody tells us something, could we tell them what they said? It's even interesting in doing the one-to-one. You could stop at the end of a period of time in the one-to-one and say, try to tell each other what you each said. And that would be an exercise in trying to really pay attention when somebody's talking instead of formulating our next brilliant response to that point. So, I mean, you can do it in simple kind of ways, it seems to me. So, go to the museum and see just 2 paintings instead of getting through the whole gallery. Second point, what we got to do is to celebrate our bodiliness, our earthiness. Matthew Fox lists this with the word, he says that's what humility is. Humility comes from the Latin word humus, which means earth. So the humility for him would be not to sort of not be proud about certain things or not boastful, but to be in touch with one's earthiness. Humility would say, I am what I am, I'm a product of the earth, and therefore I'm a bodily creature, and therefore I'm a limited creature. That's the truth. Paul said that humility is truth, and so there's the idea of trying to get in touch with that truth that we are products of the earth. And that all of this would help us to remember the importance of the bodily side of our spirituality. And that's becoming more and more evident, and we We have to relearn it all the time. I think that we grace builds on nature, that our bodiliness has a lot to do with our spirituality, and that's a problem. I mean, let's face it. Our bodies are products of the earth, and our bodies are limited, and our bodies give us all kind of trouble, both in a physical sense and in a spiritual, mental sense. So our bodies get tired and they don't keep functioning, and then sometimes they're clumsy and they don't do things right, and our bodies bring us sickness and pull us down. And then there's all the psychic side of it. I mean, when we're not happy with our bodies, we're not pleased with them, and they again drag us down in a way. So it's not a simple kind of thing here of saying, oh, whoopee, we're bodily creatures, and let's all celebrate that. I mean, that's nice words, but the question is, I mean, how do we do it individually with our bodily history and with our bodily limitations and the ways that we're not happy with our body? And a lot of times, I think what that tells us is that I got this sort of feeling. I mean, we got a genetic package here, you know. I always wanted to be 6'2" and 190, and so that I could pursue my baseball career. You know, and what do you do when you find out you can only run so fast? I mean, you try to learn to run faster, but then after a while you find that no matter what you do, or trying to exercise, lifting, whatever you do, there's a limit to how fast you're going to run. Part of it seems to me to be a combination of somehow saying I'll do whatever I can to enhance my bodiliness. You know, I try to exercise or do my diet or whatever, sleep properly. But there's also a fundamental acceptance of limitation along that line. I mean, some people, no matter how much they diet, they're still going to be overweight. And some people, no matter what they do with their bodies, they're not going to be like they want them to be. So the spirituality here is not a glib one again, and we both are our bodies and we have a body. The body brings us certain pleasures, and it's our bodies the way we're in contact with people, and we communicate, and there's some parts of our bodies that maybe we're happy about, pleased with, when it works right, and it seems to be in sync, and so on. But there's also the other negative side, and there's got to be some sort of acceptance or letting go of that and saying, hey, that's me, what am I going to do about it? You know, that's it. I got to live with it and somehow be at ease with the bodily limitations as I find them now. Tricky business, but I think it's something like that dialectic of doing the best we can with what God's given us, but then also accepting the limitations of all of that. Yeah, I think that's the point to, I'll make this another point. The third one is this practical thing. That is, we have to learn to make pleasure work for us and not against us. We have to see the goodness of pleasure and try to make it work. I think of that with the bodily. I mean, if we're going to do exercise, we ought to do something we sort of like, because then there's a better chance you're going to keep doing it. It's as simple as that. Maybe if you're on a diet and you can find foods you actually like to eat, you ought to do that, because then there's a better chance you're going to continue the diet. And so you have to see the way the pleasures of life could work for us and not against us. I mean, why read, for example, someone say reading a spiritual book and they can't stand it, and there's this other one that they really like. I mean, why try to plow through the one you don't like? Throw it away and read the one you like. And I think that goes with something even like the Scriptures. I mean, some people might say, well, I know the Bible's it, and it's what you're supposed to read, it's great and everything, but to tell you the truth, I never get anything out of it. Well, I mean, there's some purists who say, stick with it, try to get that Bible. I mean, I'd probably be more likely to say, well, set it aside, 5 years from now, maybe you could read it, but read something you like now. That's pleasurable, because then we're more likely to keep doing that spiritual reading. Oh, wouldn't it be good if that we could get to where when we're sensitive to others and we try to do for others that we like it? Instead of we don't have to grit our teeth. Then if we could get to that stage, then the pleasure would carry us. And we would like to do it. It's like when one is in love, it's easy to do for the other person. When one has fallen out of love, it's hard to do for the other person. It'd be good if we could get in a situation where as much as possible we sort of like to do what's right. And that's what in the spiritual life means, putting on the mind of Christ. We begin to do naturally what the way he calls us to act. That's again the value of virtue. Virtuous action should be pleasurable. To establish a virtue means we do it easily, we do it with pleasure. It's like second nature to us. So if we're going to make progress in spiritual life, we're going to cultivate virtues. We're not going to be gritting our teeth and always doing the thing that's hard and hurting. Let's do things that we like and that are good and benefit people. Next, let's celebrate the beauty. Let's make beauty an important element in Christian spirituality. A great thinker who just died right after he was made a cardinal, Hans Urs von Balthasar, and his whole theology is built around beauty. God's splendor shines in the world. And he keeps saying that the Christian message, when it's presented to people, when we tell it to our kids, the next generation, when we look at ourselves here in the church, it ought to appear to be beautiful. It ought to have an integrity to it, a form. And so we look at, wow, it's marvelous, this Christian view of life. It holds together, it's organically related, it's got proper form, it's got good balance. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful way to see it. So that Balthasar says with too much we put the good in the center of our theology, like we're going to become better people, or the truth, we're going to find the truth. He says, let's put beauty in the center of all of our efforts, and then it will all look different. So we look, big thing in creation, we see the beauty of God's creation. God's splendor shines through it. Presentation of the message, let's make it a beautiful message so that people want to grasp onto it and make it their own. Let's cultivate an appreciation of beauty. And what that leads to is contemplation. It's in the face of beauty that we want to absorb and look. So if we see something beautiful, we want to look at it and drink it in and celebrate it. It leads to a meditative kind of attitude. So maybe one thing that people might want to do today is, it'd be nice if we had a nice day, I guess, and be outside, but that part of this whole first session, it could be to contemplate beauty, find something beautiful, and see it, and spend time with it, and then drink in what it's all about, so it reveals the infinite that's behind it. Next, develop a trusting acceptance of the growth process, which enables us to get beyond fear. Again, nice words, but the problem is doing it. But it does seem to me to be worth thinking about that fear is part of life. We fear the unknown. We fear the process very often. We don't know what's going to happen. Fear what's going to happen in the relationship. I mean, that's all part of life. We fear death, finally. And so what we need to do is to try to move beyond that so that our trust of life will enable us to function. Now, one good way of doing that is to just remind ourselves of when we did it well and when it worked fine. When we had a similar experience and we were afraid, but we dealt with it and we moved through it. So a common example I always think of is a lot of us find it hard to confront somebody else when they bug us or make us angry or whatever. And those of us who are like that, some people find it easy, all over. Other people, it's very hard because of their own sensibilities and so on. So the people who find that hard to confront and to express a negative feeling, what one would look for is an experience where one did it and it paid off or worked out or wasn't as bad as one thought or it cleared the air. It's better now because one did it. So when we do that is to learn to trust life in a very realistic way. So what we do is say, well, I confronted her before and it worked out and I tore me up to do it, and I was nervous for 2 days before I talked to her, but I finally did it, and I'm glad I did it. Now I'm in a similar situation. Now we'd hope there'd be some transference, and I'd be able to say, well, I better do it again. It worked before. I can overcome my fears once. I can do it again. That's what part of, I think, how we learn that the process of life is indeed trustworthy. Help us get beyond fear. Next number, that we learn to care for the earth, be good guests in God's house, the whole environmental sense in this. Again, a lot to be said about that. You've got a whole series of notes on it that people want to pursue it. But if this is God's home and He's the gracious host, then we really can't just mess it up. We've got a responsibility to care for it. And by the same token, we should be welcoming people for others as well. Next, celebrate the Sabbath. We were talking to somebody recently. They were in some city and they had a storage closed. Yeah, it was out in the West Coast. They had storage closed on Sunday. They thought how amazing that was. Jürgen Moltmann, who talks about this, says that what Christians ought to do is to try to make the time before Mass be a Sabbath, to keep alive the Jewish notion. So like if you go on Sunday morning, that there would be time Saturday night to get ready for that. Maybe read over the scriptures for the next day, contemplate it, do a little spiritual reading, so that we would get a Sabbath, a Jewish Sabbath kind of thing going, which would prepare us for our Christian Sabbath celebration. That's interesting. I mean, a way of thinking about it. I guess Saturday's our party night generally, or our go-out night. Maybe there's time, a way to work some of that in as part of night prayers on Saturday night, or whatever that would help us celebrate the Sabbath. I mean, is it totally out of line to think that there could be some time on Sunday to extend whatever happened at the Mass, to talk with one's family members in the car going home, or to talk about what went on at a meal time? That's probably possible, but I mean, other parts might work. Other ways of doing it. I actually know people who try to do that. They go out for brunch after Mass, and they use it as a time to talk about the homily, the scripture readings, and the meaning of the Mass. That would be us extending the Sabbath celebration. Why do we do that? Well, we extend the Sabbath celebration or play it up so that we'd be more attuned to God's presence in the world all the time. And finally, we need to avoid the dualistic thinking. That means that where we see ourselves making value judgments upon the other pair, putting other people down, other things down, we need to find a more holistic approach. This theology I'm suggesting does that. It makes it organic. It makes us part of it. There's no room in this to talk about patriarchy or sexism. No room to put other people down. No room to put nature down. It all becomes part of God's evolving creation. And from that perspective, we see that there's an essential unity that stands behind all of the differences, and those bring us together. Again, that would be a subject of the whole lecture, but at least we start this time that way. Well, that's my original presentation. It gives us a substantial period of time to meditate on this and so on. I'm going to make this suggestion. We're going to eat at 11:30, and then a reasonable time to start again this afternoon. Eat at 11:30. I would say I'm looking at either maybe about 12:30 to reassemble, or do people want more time? I'd say no sooner than 12:30, and maybe the alternative time would be 1 o'clock. That would give people any time to walk or whatever. So we're taking a vote. We have two choices here. How many people want to reassemble? Your choices are 12:30 or 1 o'clock to reassemble. Those in favor of 12:30. Those in favor of 1. Yeah, right. questions? Yeah.
Well, this is a comment in response to celebrating the beauty. I have the feeling that we so often pick and choose what we want to label beauty as opposed to accepting beauty the way it is itself. And I think the weather today is one example that we have probably done a lot of bad mouthing the weather. And if you just look at it as it is, as it even was when we walked out of the house this morning, it is beautiful. The rain on the pine trees, the rain on the grass, it is just beautiful. I think we so often get caught up in thinking about the weather, how it affects me, as opposed to how it is. And if we truly feel a oneness with nature, we might even think of ourselves as the grass soaking up the rain, the moisture, and then I think we get a different feel towards it.
I hope people heard. Can you hear on the other side? Somehow a line from Thoreau was coming to me where he talks about the rain falling on the ground, and rain being one of those things that tells him about the friendliness of nature. Rain in the woods. I mean, it does many different things. I mean, I often think of, this kind of day for me would put me in a reflective mood. I mean, to me, it would be, it's a catalyst for reflection. Like if I drive on a day like this, it would tend to make me want to meditate. But everyone's different, but what you're really saying is, there's also, it's the attitude you bring to it again, isn't it? It's the perspective that you see it in, that enables you to see something good, positive, beautiful in the whole situation.
And not in a Pollyanna kind of way, that it really is there.
But it's
Whether
always,
or not we appreciate it,
yeah,
it's still there.
Yeah. I'd say there's big philosophical questions involved in all of that. The saying, and what you're on is the sort of objective character of beauty. The man who probably wrote tellingly in our story is Jacques Maritain, and many people have to read Maritain. So art and aestheticism, which sound like stuff Martin Maritain said in Art and Aestheticism, where he was fighting the total relativistic notion of beauty as a subjective notion. In the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition, scholastic, which he represented, there was an objective character to beauty that impinges us, and that our job is somehow to put that.
That's the second, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, along the same line of thought, I'm becoming very integral with such words as implementer and what we call the insect test. Again, that's our label for something in the natural world, rather than recognizing what it is. Even
But I think your point is well taken. How does that relate to a hurricane? That'd be a good springboard to our talk this afternoon on the SAR report. Maybe that comes up here. Try to inform us.
I didn't mind the rain this morning. I was just glad it wasn't snow like last Saturday. It was beautiful.
It's that notion of a trustworthy God kind of taking us down the road to predetermination.
Trustworthy God take us down the road to predetermination, predestination, and so on. Calvinistic outlook. Well, one thing I would say is that it heavily slants our sense of salvation. Put it that way. There's no doubt about that. In other words, if you really think that the God who has made the world is trustworthy and on our side and with us in the process, then it becomes hard to think that like half the people or more are going to hell. So it moves it towards what I call a salvation optimism as opposed to a predestination. Salvation optimism, in other words, the flow of the world is towards its final moment, that his will get there, that the process is not just absurd, it's not that you're told by the idiot at all, but that it has an inner meaning to it. So that, yes, it gives you that positive sense, I think, no doubt about it. I mean, however, not moves to the kind of predestination deny freedom of the will. I think it's important to keep that in mind. That's why we have the option of working with God in this creative process. It really highlights the great importance of our freedom, that we decide to do our bit to move the process forward. If we don't do our bit, it doesn't get done. And you can say that that's in the family. If you don't reconcile today, there's an element of unity that's lost in this day. You know, it's simple. If you don't do something about the neighborhood, it doesn't get improved. If you don't help out in the parish, it doesn't get done. I mean, all of this stuff of spreading the kingdom and moving the evolutionary process forward highlights the importance of human decisions, even those which are seemingly insignificant or seem to be minor. It also highlights the idea that with our failures have great significance. That's why I don't ever like to talk about venial sins as light sins, because sometimes venial sins have tremendous weight, tremendous consequences. That our venial sins of omission, for example, where there's something that could be done and we could do it and we don't do it, and as a result, I mean, very bad things can happen, very weighty consequences. So what I see is that it puts great stress on freedom rather than take it away, which happened in the classic predestination theories. The people became automatons or pawns. But, so I'd say salvation optimism combined with a great stress on human freedom. But you know, I think you properly catch the sense of it. Yeah, I mean, his trustworthy character of life is crucial.
Probably being sacrilegious, but still have an image of God as an active creator, not a passive creator. I don't think God created us years ago and let us develop. I think that God is in a state of development where he looks down and responds to the creation that he has created and more creatively alters what comes next. I think he sees the scientific mind and what it can do, and then he gives even more of that. He sees us use our talents, and he responds in like to the following creation. I think that that's an idea of a living God and not one that died several years ago.
You know, if people heard that, we would find a fine articulation of that viewpoint in what we call process theology, in the thought of Alfred North Whitehead, who talks about no matter what you choose, God will find the next best possible path for you. So if at any given point we make a poor decision, that God's response to our poor decision is to find a new path that will be the best possible thing for us, so that if we close a door, God will open it, to use that kind of imagery. And that God is, in the process, God is always responsive to what we do. God's response is dependent on ours in a sense. So if we take a faulty path, it's not the end of the world, because God will find a way out of the faulty path to lead to a more creative situation. So it's very, the process thinkers articulate the point you made, I think, very well. It accords with a lot of the biblical language about God's responsiveness to the human situation. People do certain things and God responds. You even get the bargaining concept into scriptures. You're going to save them for 100 or 50 or 10, whatever. But I think there's a legitimate notion in that in all theologies that understand, that are positive about God, that God is fundamentally on our side, and you can trust the God to open up new dimensions for us. Why don't we move to the next segment of this whole thing, which is befriending the darkness. Again, I'm using the schema developed by Matthew Fox, as he says this is a good way to think about human growth, and I think that has merit. And certainly this fourfold process, if we followed it well, would enable a lot of us to function better. So to remind you of the outline, it is befriending creation, as we looked at it first, then befriending the darkness, then befriending our creative side, and finally befriending the whole effort at social justice or compassion, what he calls befriending the new creation, the transformed world. So this is the second of his 4 steps as we look at it, and he calls this befriending the darkness. So it becomes a matter of saying, well, what are we meaning by the darkness? Well, I think that that's a broad term that encompasses many things. I think, first of all, it would encompass suffering, both physical and mental suffering. I think it also includes sin, human sin and guilt. I would include in it also the idea of social sin, that is institutional evil that somehow holds people back or thwarts their growth. Very often we include in the dark forces our own emotional life, maybe especially our negative emotions that seem to be out of control or difficult to manage. There, the word darkness begins to merge more with what I call the mystery part of life. So that very often these dark forces are really not negative, but they appear to be negative because they scare us. I mean, human sexuality would be a good way of looking at that, of distinguishing out the types of darkness. I mean, human sexuality would have a mysterious character to it. Elements of it that are not easily understood and not easily managed. And is finally sort of beyond our ability to totally manage or control. And therefore, it would come under this general heading, I think, of what we're talking about as darkness. And then I think we could also look at the physical evils in the world. So that's where the hurricane comes in, and the earthquake, so on. They become dark forces. That has affected the consciousness. The great earthquake in Lima, Peru, back, I'm not remembering the years, I'm in the 1600s, changed the consciousness of Europe very much. So that very often the natural disasters have forced people to rethink some of their attitudes and outlooks on life, and part of what it's done is to undercut what I call a naively optimistic view of life. You could think of the Black Plague along this line and what that did to the consciousness of Western civilization. So, anyway, when we talk about befriending the dark forces, it's all of those things and maybe more, too, that people would want to add to the list. Now, those cause a certain problems. There are inept responses to that. There are destructive responses to the dark forces. I'll just try to talk a little bit about some of them. And again, the idea is to see, for each one of us to examine ourselves, where do I deal inadequately with dark forces that are part of my own life. The demons of attack. Let me talk. I didn't say enough about the demons. That's right. Among the dark forces, we must list the demons.
Now it's rolling. I knocked it over. I started now.
I recall other situations where the piece of equipment has not worked, much to our chagrin. The demons of attack. We will do an exorcism of this. So, bad things can happen here, bad reactions to the dark forces. One becomes what I would call a paralyzing fear. Paralyzing fear of the dark forces. Or one simply, they're overwhelming, they're too much. So someone finds himself jealous of another person, and not just an easy-going jealousy, but sort of a deep-rooted thing. They're sitting there saying, I can't face this. I can't believe I'm that jealous. I can't really admit that to myself, and therefore I really can't function in this set of relationships that have caused this jealousy. I have to withdraw from those. I can't go to those parties anymore. Can't interact with that family. And so we're become unable really to function in an effective and human way. Second kind of thing that deals with the dark forces, especially the dark force that I would call insecurity, the unknown, is an attempt to control excessively. You're going to control all aspects of life and make sure it's going to happen the way we want it. And sometimes it becomes sort of a devious process where people are going to try to go behind others' backs or make sure it's going to happen the way they want it. We find it happening in personal relationships where people will exercise a manipulative control, try to make it all be the way they want it to be. So that would be another way in which the dark force of the unknown future, of the insecurity, that emotion could then force sort of compulsive behavior. Compulsive behavior not only could be paralyzed, but then the other thing is that we act in a way that is destructive and almost unable to overcome it or get out of it. And one's sitting there saying, well, why did I do that? I knew it would cause a problem. I knew it would make it worse. Why did I do that? So that all of the compulsive behavior become part of poor management of the dark forces. You start looking at alcoholism or overeating or excessive clinging to authority, excessive drive for power, all these compulsive behaviors that take us over because we are not able to manage these dark forces, especially of insecurity. Another way this happens is that the projecting of the dark side upon other people. I'm flashing on the movie Mississippi Burning. I don't know if people saw it, but it's a racial situation in the South, and where you can see many of the characters unable to deal with their own life, their own inadequacies, and so on, then have to project it out. There's an especially poignant scene in there where Gene Hackman's talking about his father, and his father, there was a black man that had a neighboring farm and got a mule, and thereby Gene Hackman's father, a white man, didn't have a mule on his farm, and one day the mule turned up dead, and at one point Gene Hackman, in interacting with his father, just intuitively knew that his father had shot the black man's mule and killed it, and the idea is that his father then made a statement something like this, that, well, unless there's somebody below you, you're nobody. I don't know if I got the words right, but that was the idea. Unless there's somebody below you, you're nobody. So then you begin to see this idea of projecting onto other people. And it's an interesting analysis in that to ask ourselves, who are the people who especially bug us? And one may well find out that they have the very characteristics that we don't like in ourselves. It's a very telling analysis. Very often the people who bother us most precisely have characteristics we don't like about ourselves, and therefore what we're doing is not dealing with the darkness inside ourselves, project out onto others. You see that, I think, with the homophobia in the world today. Very often people are homophobic, who are fearful of gay people and need to put gay people down, find that they're not all that secure about their own sexuality. And that's what causes the need to put this other group down. Racial analysis goes that way, sexual differences, and so on.
At this time, move on to the second tape.